Sārārtha-darśinī Bhakti-vedanta Narayan Gosvāmī Maharaj Śrīla Gurudeva ki jai. Nityalla Pravishtam Vishnupā Sārārtha-darśinī Bhakti-vedanta Narayan Gosvāmī Maharaj Śrīla Gurudeva ki jai. Nityalla Pravishtam Vishnupā Sārārtha-darśinī Bhakti-vedanta Vāman Gosvāmī Maharaj ki jai. Nityalla Pravishtam Vishnupā Sārārtha-darśinī Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosvāmī Maharaj ki jai. Nityalla Pravishta Maha Bhagavat Śrīla Gaurkishoras Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Nityalla Pravishta Śrīla Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Ṭhākura ki jai. Nityalla Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Śrīla Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Rupa Nugagoriya Guru Varga ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Bhattadasa Raghunath Shāra Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Shri Swarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki jai. Naam Achaya Śrīla Haridas Ṭhākura ki jai. Prem se koho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradatta Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kunda ki jai. Shri Yamuna Devi Ganga Devi ki jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya ki jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Shri Nita Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Uddhava-gi ki jai. Sārārtha-darśinī vritti ki jai. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura ki jai. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya ki jai. Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda ki jai. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad Bhakti Vedanta Narayanitti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo mahavadanyaya Krishna prema pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. Kurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yang Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayano Virahaka Tara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Taravo Bhinedustang Sarvabhuta Hridayam Munimanatosmi Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasvatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. Shrinvatang Svakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridantasto Yabhadrani Vidhunoti Surit Satam. Nashta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityang Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Tavai Vasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayamang Charanantikam. Bhaktya Vihina Aparada Lakshaya Kshiptastakama Dittaranga Madhye Kripa Mai Tvam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanara Vindam. Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Let's see. Hari Bol, everybody. Dandavat Pranams. So, as you probably already noticed, I'm pre-recording this. That's why the connection's so good. Yeah, I'm uploading this to make it go live at our normal time, but right now it's actually 5:22 p.m. here in Navadvip on 13th May. But I will come into the chat at the beginning of the reading to see everybody who has joined and to offer pranam to all of you. And yeah, so yesterday we heard about all the different elements and the different categorizations. Many different Krishna is telling Uddhava all the different categorizations of different philosophers. That was most of what we read yesterday, was tons of categorizations of the elements. And so I'm not going to reread that part. I'll reread. Let's have a recap though of everything else that we read. Let's just see. Okay, so for like 24 verses, Krishna was going through and saying, according to some philosophers, there are 11 basic truths: the 5 gross elements, the 5 senses, and the soul. There are others who propound the conception of 9 basic truths: the 5 gross elements, the mind, intelligence, false ego, and the soul. So there's tons of categorizations like this. And now Krishna says, thus, philosophers have categorized the material elements in various ways. All of these categorizations are based upon logic and reason, and certainly exhibit great dexterity of intelligence. Okay, so Krishna answered Uddhava's question about why there are so many different categorization of the elements. And now Uddhava asks, I have understood that the living entities and material nature are distinct existences, and yet they appear to be inextricably connected. After all, the living beings are embodied by matter and follow the ways of the modes of nature. O lotus-eyed Lord, O omniscient one, please remove this doubt from my heart with your words, which exhibit your great skill in reasoning. It is by your mercy that the living entities obtain knowledge, and it is by your illusory energy that they fall from knowledge. I believe that no one but you can actually understand how your illusory energy works. The Supreme Lord said. So wait, this basically what was Uddhava's question? Was how are the living entities and material nature, they're distinct, but they seem to be inextricably connected. So how are they, I guess it's asking how they're different, even though they seem so, inseparable. So now the Supreme Lord said, O best among men, there is distinct difference between material nature and the living entities and the Supreme Lord. These three have distinct differences between them. This manifest universe undergoes constant transformation, being acted upon by the agitation of the modes of nature. My dear Uddhava, my material energy, consisting of 3 modes by which it acts, manifests the varieties of creation, along with varieties of consciousness for perceiving them. The resultant cosmic manifestation can be understood in these three aspects: adhyatmika, adidaivika, and adibhautika. And there's a good explanation for this. Maybe it was in the next verse. Okay. The eyes of the living entities represents the adhyatma feature of nature. The object of vision represents the adibhuta feature. And the light provided by the sun represents the adidaiva feature. These three features work together to reveal one another. These three features work together to reveal one another, but the sun in the sky is self-manifested. Similarly, the Supersoul is the original cause of the three features, adhyatmic, adibhotic, and adidaivik, but is self-sufficient, acting by the illumination of his own transcendental existence as the ultimate source of manifestation of all created beings. Similarly, so adhyatmic is arising from one's own mind, adibhotic is arising from other living beings, and adidaivik is arising from the demigods and through nature and like that, right? Like, that's how I've understood it. I'm not 100% sure if I'm right. Let's read the commentary for this verse again. The function of the eye is to recognize form, and so when there is recognition of form, the eye's presence is understood. The perception of form by the eye also depends upon light, which is supplied by the demigods, so that's adidaivik, who are in charge of universal management. The demigods also depend upon those who they control, the members of human society, that's adibhotic, right? And thus, there are three interdependent factors to be considered. Adhyatma, represented by the senses, which includes the mind also, right? So adhyatma, that's your own self, your own senses. Adibhuta, represented by the sense objects and other living entities that's outside of yourself. And adidaiva, represented by the demigods. So that's natural disturbances, the rain, the sun, all these things like that. So like one's inside yourself, one are the things, the living entities and sense objects and everything outside of yourself, and the other is what's coming down from the demigods, like the rain, sun, all that. However, the Supersoul exists independently from all such created existences. The example is given of how the sun is situated in its orbit without any extraneous help. In this way, the Supersoul can be compared to that sun because he is the original cause of all material manifestations, and yet is independent of them. He is self-illuminated by his own glories, and he enlightens all other illuminating agents. Yet, he always remains aloof. Okay, so then we also read verse 32. Similarly, the skin's object of perception is touch, and Vayu is its controlling deity. The ear's object of perception is sound, and the demigods of the directions are the controlling deities. The tongue's object of perception is taste, and Varuna is the controlling deity. The nose's object of perception is aroma, and the twin Ashwini Kumars are the controlling deities. The mind's object of perception is thought and feelings, and the moon god is the controlling deity. Intelligence is the power of discrimination, and Lord Brahma is the controlling deity. False ego manifests pride, and Lord Rudra is the controlling deity. Okay, so this is where we read up to, verse 33. Just checking everything's running okay, it looks like it. Yoso gunak shobha krito. Yoso gunak shobha krito vikara. Pradhana mulan mahata prasuta. Ahang trivrin moha vikalpa hetur. Vaikarikastamasa indriyascha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his form as time, agitates the three modes of material nature. The total material ingredients, or Mahat-tattva, thus gives rise to the false ego, which is the cause of the three kinds of illusion, Vaikārika, Tamasa, and Aindriya. Sārārtha-darśinī. The cosmic manifestation is the result of the agitation of the three modes of material nature. False ego, which is born from the Mahat-tattva, has three features, known as Vaikārikam, Tamasa, and Indriyaja. It is this illusion or ignorance that causes one to think that the cosmic manifestation is ultimate reality. So that was the Sārārtha-darśinī vritti of Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura, and now the Gauḍīya Bhāṣya of Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda. Due to the agitation of the three modes of material nature, the cosmic manifestation comes into being as a transformation of the total material energy, and thus the conditioned souls are put into a condition of birth and death. If the conditioned souls give up their false identification with matter by accepting their real identity as the Lord's eternal servants, they can revive their dormant original consciousness. Here, the word moha vikalpa hetu indicates that false ego causes one to think of himself as the enjoyer of material nature, thus making him undergo conditions of happiness and distress. This false ego can only be overcome by accepting the real ego as the Lord's eternal servitor. Atma parigyanamayo vivado Yastiti nastiti bidhartha nishtaha Vyarto pinaivo parameta pungsam Mata paravritta dhyam svalokat. The speculative debates of mundane philosophers who argue, this world is real. No, it is not real. All these arguments are based on incomplete knowledge of the Supreme Lord and cannot go beyond understanding the actions of the material dualities. Although such arguments are useless, those who have turned their attention away from me, their true self, are unable to give them up. Sārārtha-darśinī. Learned scholars are the ones who are supposed to be capable of removing all of one's doubts. However, even such philosophers are doubtful about the nature of existence. Some philosophers try to establish, by means of reasoning and arguments, that the material world is real. Then there are others who try to prove through speculative arguments that this world is false. For this reason, there is constant debate and doubt within the minds of all the mundane scholars. Such controversy is simply due to a lack of information about the Supreme Lord. When one realizes a self and Supreme Self, there is no longer any question of dispute. Duality is experienced when one accepts something other than the Supreme Lord as life's ultimate goal. Atheists, who have no faith in the existence of the Lord, put forward various theories, saying that this world is not real and has no foundation in truth. On the other hand, those who have realized the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead never doubt the reality of the universe, because they know it to be an emanation from the absolute truth. Without understanding the supreme absolute truth, one will never be able to ascertain the truth of material nature. The speculations of materially conditioned philosophers can never reach a conclusion until they take shelter of the Lord. The devotees avoid useless arguments in this regard, because they are satisfied with the understanding presented by the Lord Himself. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. One whose intelligence is under the influence of illusion falls into the pool of duality and invites the mentality of accepting something and rejecting something else. In such a condition, one doubts the very reality of his existence, and that he doubts the reality of existence and that of the world. Having fallen under the control of the Lord's external energy due to being bereft of the Lord's service, the conditioned souls become doubtful of the reality of the cosmic manifestation, and thus take to the path of dry arguments. As a result of their own karma, and while praising the three modes of material nature, they become subject to higher and lower births, as well as lamentation, illusion, and so on. One second, just drinking some water. Shri Uddhava uvacha Tvata paravrata dhiya Svakritai karmabhi prabho Ucha vachan yata dehan Grinnanti visrajanti cha Tan mamakya hi govinda Durvi bhavyam anatmabhi Nahyetat prayasho loke Vidvangsa santivanchitaha. Sri Uddhava said, O Lord Govinda, please explain to me how those who are averse to understanding the absolute truth accept and then give up different kinds of higher and lower bodies as a result of their fruitive activities. This is very difficult for the ignorant people of this world who are cheated by illusion to understand. This is very difficult to understand for the people of this world who are cheated by illusion. Why they give up different kinds of higher and lower bodies as a result of the fruitive activities. Sārārtha-darśinī. If one's intelligence is opposed to the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, then all one's activities simply creates material bondage. As a result of engaging in fruitive activities, one is forced to accept higher and lower bodies and give them up when their allotted duration of life is over. This is the case for those who are averse to the Supreme Lord. No one can be considered intelligent without understanding the science of God, which includes a description of the negative results of those who have forgotten their eternal relationship with Him. There are many so-called wise men in the world, but although considering themselves to be most intelligent, they generally do not surrender to the supreme intelligence of the Lord. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. When the living entities fall down from the Lord's service and embrace Maya, they become dependent upon others for survival. Being conditioned by the external energy of the Lord, they become falsely proud, thinking themselves to be the doers of activities, and thus are forced to suffer or enjoy the results. Due to aversion to the Supreme Lord, the living entities receive superior and inferior material bodies that force them to suffer the pangs of repeated birth and death. The conditioned souls are unable to understand their actual position due to the pride that is generated from false ego. The more one becomes attached to enjoying the fruits of his actions, the more one's aversion to the Lord becomes prominent. Shri Bhagavan uvacha Mana karma mayam drinam Indriyai panchabhir yutam Lokam prayatanya Atmatar anuvartate. Give me 1 second. I need to write a note because I keep on forgetting to do something important. Oops, I wrote Flordia. Whatever. Okay. So Lord Krishna said, the mind of the conditioned soul is formed by the reactions to his fruit of work, to his karma. Wait, what is that? The mind of the conditioned soul is formed by the reactions due to his fruit of work, due to his karma. Taking the conditioned soul with it, the mind travels throughout the universe. Although the soul is distinct from the material mind, it must helplessly follow it in conditional life. Sārārtha-darśinī. The subtle body, consisting of mind, intelligence, and false ego, takes the conditioned soul from one body to another, from one planet to another, according to the results of his fruitive acts. Although the spirit soul is distinct from the material mind, it is forced to follow it to its next destination. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Demanding constant gratification, the material senses engage in activities under the control of the conditioned mind. The mind, whose only business is accepting and rejecting material objects for enjoyment, can only act with the help of the senses. The gross and subtle bodies are simply temporary designations of the eternal spirit soul. The gross and subtle body are simply temporary designations of the eternal spirit soul. The spirit soul views the world from within his gross and subtle coverings, and as his mentality develops, he must transmigrate from one body to another. In conditional life, the tendency to accept the gross and subtle bodies as a self becomes very strong. Dhyayan mano nuvishayan drishtan vanu shrutan atha udyatsidat karma tantram smritistar anushamyati. The mind, which is bound by the reactions of fruitive activities, contemplates the objects of the senses that are found in this world, as well as those existing in heaven. Thus, the mind appears to come into being, and then become annihilated along with its objects of perception, so that its ability to distinguish past and future is lost. Sārārtha-darśinī. The spirit soul always accompanies the subtle body. When the living entity is separated from the gross body, this is called death. His coming in contact with another gross body is called birth. In this verse, the Supreme Lord explains the cause. The Supreme Lord explains the cause of loss of memory. The mind, under the control of karma, always meditates on the objects of the senses, such as the beautiful women of this world and the celestial women of the heavenly planets. When the mind becomes fully merged in the thought of a particular sense object, it will force one to accept a similar form in the future. At the time of death, the mind carries the conditioned soul into a woman's womb to develop another body that will experience another set of sense objects. Death causes the forgetfulness of one's past sensual activities, but it is the same mind that develops when one comes out from the womb. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. By always remaining absorbed in thought of the objects of this material world, either directly or indirectly, one loses his transcendental memory of his relationship with God. By identifying with matter, which is always undergoing transformation, forgetfulness of the self occurs. By identifying with matter, which is always undergoing transformation, forgetfulness of the self occurs. Okay. Vishaya biniveshena natmanam yat smaret puna jantor vai kasyachir dhetor mrityur atyanta vismriti. When the conditioned soul quits his body to accept another body, according to his past karma, he becomes accustomed to his new situation and forgets everything that happened in his last life. Death means the complete forgetfulness of one's previous life. That's interesting way of explaining it. Sārārtha-darśinī. Due to full absorption in the present body, the mind does not remember the previous body, which may have been that of a demigod or a demon, according to the results of karma. Death means total forgetfulness of the previous gross body. When one's reactions of karma allotted to the present body are exhausted, death occurs. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Because of full absorption in the objects of the senses, one's desires for sense gratification goes on increasing. Temporary forgetfulness of the objects of the senses occurs at the time of death, which simply means that the conditioned soul is being transferred from one gross body to another. Is this fan making too much noise? Maybe I should move away from it a little bit. Okay. Text 40. Janma tvatmataya pungsa sarvabhavena bhuridha vishaya swakritim prahur yata swapna manoratha. O greatly charitable Uddhava, just as one may accept a dream or a fantasy as reality, the acceptance of a new body as the self is called birth. Sārārtha-darśinī. The acceptance of a new body according to one's karma is called birth. Our identification with our own body and our blind acceptance of bodily relationships as permanent constitute a prolonged form of dreaming or fantasy in which one imagines oneself to be separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The term birth, therefore, does not refer to the generation of a new entity, but to the blind acceptance by the spirit soul of a new material body. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Imagination without practical action is called a daydream. The mental concoction that occurs in a sleeping state is called a dream. Dream and imagination are insignificant states of existence, and they are similar to our state of wakefulness, where we accept perishable objects as being permanent. The only real difference is that our life of wakefulness lasts longer than any dream. Swapna manoratam chetam praktanam na smaratyaso tatra purvam ivatmanam apurvam chanupashyati. When a person dreams at night, he forgets his waking identity. Similarly, one who accepts the material body as a self, although eternal, forgets what kind of existence he previously had, thinking his present life to be all in all. Sārārtha-darśinī. Someone may claim that a dreaming person may sometimes remember a previous dream. The answer is that there are exceptions to the general rule that everyone forgets his previous lives. There is a mystic power known as jati smara, whereby one can remember his previous life. Generally, however, one accepts this life as everything, having completely forgotten his past life. Interesting. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Just as the memory of today's dream or daydream soon fades away, and is forgotten when one has another dream or daydream the next day, because one is unable to remember his previous life, his birth appears to him to be the start of a new existence. Indriyāyana shrishtyedam traividyang bhati vastuni bahirantar bidhahetur jano sajjanakridyatha. Because the mind, which is the resting place of the senses, has created an identification with a new body, the material conceptions of high, middle, and low class appear as if pertaining to the soul. In this way, the self creates external and internal duality, just as a man might give birth to a bad son. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. A world of enjoyment is constructed in this life by the mind with the help of the senses. As a result of bodily identification, temporary considerations of superiority and inferiority and immediate arise. As a result of bodily identification, temporary considerations of superiority, inferiority, and intermediate arise. Sorry, I spaced out when I read that. A father may by nature be peaceful, but because his bad son gets into trouble, the father is forced to defend his son and consider his son's enemies to be the enemies of the entire family. Thus, the bad son implicates the father in troublesome conflicts. Similarly, the spirit soul has no intrinsic problems, but by creating a false identification with the material body, the soul becomes involved in the happiness and distress of the body. With this verse, the Lord summarizes his discussion of the difference between the body and the soul. Nityada hyanga bhutani bhavanti na bhavanti cha kale na lakshvegena shukshmatvat tanna drishyate. My dear Uddhav, by the influence of the unseen time, material bodies are being created and annihilated at every moment. However, because time is so subtle, its actions are imperceptible. Sārārtha-darśinī. Just as time is imperceptible, the constant creation and annihilation brought about by time is not seen by the conditioned souls due to time's subtle nature. Yatarchisam shruta samcha Valanam va vanaspate tataiva sarva bhutanam vayo vastadaya krita. Just as, by the influence of time, the flame of a lamp, the waves of a river, and the fruits of a tree constantly change, the age and condition of the material bodies of the living entities also change. Sārārtha-darśinī. Although one's birth and death may not be seen at present, they can be understood by hypothesis. All material transformations are caused by the influence of imperceptible time. The examples given are the flame of a lamp, the movement of waves in a river, and fruit, which are always seen as changing. In the same way, birth and death can be perceived with relation to the material body, although the action of time is practically unperceivable. By observing the changes of the body from childhood to youth to old age, one can understand the subtle action of time. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Birth and death take place by the subtle influence of time. The flickering flame of a candle sometimes waxes brightly and then again becomes weak and finally dies out. The waves of a river are endlessly flowing. The fruit of a tree gradually appear, grow, ripen, sweeten, and eventually rot and die. Similarly, one can easily understand that one's own body is undergoing constant transformation, and that the body is certainly subject to old age, disease, and death. Soyam diporchisham yadvat srotasam tadidam jalam soyam puman iti nrinam mrishagir dhir mrishayusham. Just as an ignorant person says, "This is the light of the lamp," and "This is the water of the river," even though the rays of light and water in the river are constantly changing, one displays his false intelligence by thinking that the particular stage of the body represents the actual person. Sārārtha-darśinī. Someone may say, "This is the light of the lamp," but factually, there are innumerable rays emanating from the lamp at every moment. Similarly, one may speak of the water of the river, but the fact is that different water passes by at every moment. In the same way, when we think that someone is a child, that is not the fact. The body transforms through various stages and does not indicate the actual identity of the indwelling soul. Whether in the body of a child or in the body of an old man, the soul is one and the same. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As his body changes, a man may think that he has surpassed his previous condition. As the flame of a lamp gradually becomes dim as the fuel is burnt, and as the waves of a river take on different shapes, ignorant human beings accept the changing body as the constitutional nature of the self. Actually, the constitutional nature of the living entities never changes. Mundane transformations are temporary in nature. When the spirit soul's eternal variegated pastimes are engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord, they do not create any distaste or abomination. Ma svasya karma bijena jayate sopyayam puman mriyate vamaro bhrantya yatagnir daru samyuta. Just as fire is produced from wood and then is extinguished when the wood is completely burnt, the living entities who are eternal mistakenly think that they have taken birth as a result of their past karma and then die. Sārārtha-darśinī. When we burn some wood, it appears as if the fire is created at some point of time and then is extinguished when the fuel is spent. Actually, the element of fire continuously exists throughout the creation, although sometimes it is manifest to our eyes and sometimes not. Similarly, the living entities are eternally existing, but because of our limited vision, it appears as if someone is born and then later. Similarly, the living entities are eternally existing, but because of our limited vision, it appears as if someone is born and then later on dies. This illusory condition of life is imposed upon the living beings as a result of their fruitive activities, but still, the living entities themselves remain essentially unaffected. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Just as fire is ignited and then extinguished by contact with wood, similarly, according to his karma, a living entity is seen to undergo birth and death. Actually, the living entity is eternal, and thus never is born nor dies. As fire is present within wood and then blazes forth and burns the wood, birth and death are manifested due to the performance of fruitive activities. In this verse, the living entities have been compared to fire, which is sometimes manifest and sometimes not. There is a difference between the activities of those who are inclined to Krishna service and those who are averse to the Lord. The activities of the former enable one to enjoy eternal existence, whereas the activities of the latter keep one in a state of perpetual transformation. Nisheka garbhajanmani balya komara yovanam vayo madhyam jara mrityur ityavastastanor nava. The 9 transformations in impregnation, gestation, birth, infancy, childhood, youth, middle age, old age, and death only relate to the material body. Sārārtha-darśinī. The word nisheka means to enter the womb of the mother. The word garbha means to grow within the womb. Janma means to come out of the womb. Balya means childhood up to the age of 5. And the periods from 5 to 16 years of age are called Komara, Poganda, and Kaishora. The period from 16 to 45 years of age is known as Yovana. 46 to 60 is called middle age. And after that, one is considered to be in old age, culminating in death. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The 9 stages of the conditioned soul are impregnation, gestation, birth, childhood, youth, maturity, middle age, old age, and death. Eta manorata mayir hanyasyo cha vachastanu guna sangar upadatte kvachit kashchit jahati cha. The living entity foolishly considers the superior and inferior positions that he has attained as a result of The living entity foolishly considers the superior and inferior positions that he has attained as a result of activities performed in the past to be his actual self. It is very rare that someone can give up such a false conception by the grace of the Supreme Lord. Sārārtha-darśinī. It has already been explained that birth and death are in relation to the material body and do not apply to the spirit soul. Because of being fully engrossed in material activities, the embodied soul foolishly identifies with his bodily condition. The result of one's karma in this life determines one's future body because it shapes one's mentality at the time of death. Only a fortunate soul who receives the Lord's mercy can give up the false egoistic conceptions of I am this body and everything in relation to the body is mine. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. It is only by the mercy of the Supreme Lord that one can be released from the bodily concept of life. The Lord's mercy is causeless, and so there is always a chance of gaining relief from material existence. Atmana pitriputrabhyam anumeyo bhavapyayo na bhavapyaya vastunam abhigyo dvaya lakshana. One gains an understanding of his own birth and death by observing the death of his father and the birth of his son. In this way, when one realistically understands the birth and death of all material bodies, he will no longer be subject to these dualities. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Sārārtha-darśinī. One may question, is it a fact that the embodied living entity is the witness of all these changes of the material body? The answer is that by performing the funeral rites of one's father, and by performing the rituals related to the birth of one's son, one can understand the certainty of his own birth and death. The word bhava in this verse refers to birth, growth, and so on. One who is self-realized is not bewildered by the birth and death of the material body, knowing himself to be eternal. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The eternal spirit soul is not by nature subordinate to the external energy of the Lord, nor under the control of time. However, those who are in the conditioned state of existence have artificially put themselves in such a situation. Birth and death, as described in this verse, refers only to the material body and not the eternal soul. A sober person, knowing the soul to be eternal, therefore gives up false identification with a temporary, unreliable body and takes shelter of the devotional service of the Lord. By this process, one can escape the artificial imposition of birth and death. Taror bija vipakabhyam yo vidvan janmaj samyamo taror vilakshano drashta evam drashta tano pratak. One who observes the growth of a tree from a seed and later on the death of a tree after maturity certainly is a distinct observer who is separate from the tree. In the same way, the witness of the birth and death of the material body is distinct from it. Sārārtha-darśinī. Here the word vipaka indicates the final transformation called death. The rice plant dies just at maturity, with no apparent dwindling as we see the bodies of human beings and animals. One should carefully consider the nature of the material body and that of the observer, who is certainly transcendental to such changes of the body. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As the seer of the seed, tree, and its fruits, as a seer of the seed, tree, and fruit and its fruits is different from such transformations, the embodied soul is a silent and neutral spectator of the birth and death of his gross body. The liberated soul very well understands this principle, whereas the conditioned soul falsely identifies with his body, even as it undergoes these transformations. The witness's distinction from all visible objects is the subject matter of the liberated soul's realization. Prakriter evam atmanam avivichya buddha puman tatvena sparsha sammudha samsaram pratipadyate. An unintelligent person who cannot distinguish himself from material nature considers the material manifestation to be real. By contact with it, he becomes completely bewildered and enters into the cycle of repeated birth and death. Sārārtha-darśinī. It may be questioned, how does a foolish person fall into material existence? Because a foolish person identifies himself with matter, he naturally becomes attached to his body and the objects of the senses. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The conditioned souls, who are fully absorbed in matter, take pleasure in associating with the objects produced by material nature and thus enter deeper into material existence. Forgetfulness of the self makes him think that he is something that he is actually not. In this regard, one should carefully consider this verse from Śrīmad Bhagavatam 1.7.5. Yaya samohito jiva atmanam trigunatmakam paropi manute nartam tatkritam chabhitpadyate. Due to his external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product, and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. Sattva sangadrishin devan rajasasuramanushan tamasa bhutatiryaktvam brahmito yati karmabhi. The living entities who traverse the path of material existence, being driven by the results of their karma, take birth as sages or demigods when the mode of goodness is prominent. When the mode of passion is prominent, they take birth as demons or human beings. And when the mode of ignorance is prominent, they take birth as ghosts or in the lower species. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. By the influence of the three modes of material nature, the forgetful living entities consider themselves as enjoyers and doers, and thus receive various types of bodies, such as those of demigods, sages, demons, human beings, beasts, birds, and so on. Nrityato gayata pashyan yataivanu karotitan evang buddhi gunan pashyan aniho pyanukaryate. Just as a spectator sometimes imitates a singer or dancer, the spirit soul, although not actually the doer but merely a witness, becomes captivated by material intelligence and thus imitates its activities. Sārārtha-darśinī. One may be attracted to a professional singer or dancer and then sing the songs heard and imitate the dances seen, entering into the mood of the performer. In the same way, the conditioned soul imitates the dictations of the mind in an attempt to become an enjoyer of the material world. Such an attempt is doomed to frustration, however. Such an attempt is doomed to frustration, however. The conditioned soul is similarly captivated by the concoctions of the material mind and intelligence, which convince him that he can become the enjoyer of the material world. Such an attempt is doomed to frustration, however, because the soul is never the doer of activities, which are simply carried out by material nature, entailing repeated birth and death. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As a foolish boy may imitate a singer or dancer but fail to do a good job, the witnessing spirit soul engages his body and mind in imitating the activities of enjoyment within the material world, but fails to achieve satisfaction. Yatam phasa prachalata taravopi chala iva chakshusha brahmyamanena drishyate brahmati vabhu yata manoratha dhiyo vishayashanubhavo mrisha swapna drishtascha dasharha tata sangsara atmana. The reflection of a tree on the water appears to quiver. When one spins around and around, the earth also appears to be spinning. While dreaming, the world that one sees appears to be real, although it is a concoction. In the same way, the soul's material life, his experience of sense gratification, is actually false, O descendant of Dasharha. Sārārtha-darśinī. When one rides in a boat on a river, the trees on the bank of the river that are reflected in the water also appear to be moving. In the same way, The bewildered, conditioned souls consider themselves to be the doers of activities which are in fact merely interactions of the external body with the modes of nature. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Trees appear to be swaying when reflected in agitated water, and when one is sitting on a moving boat, the trees on the shore appear to be moving. Similarly, when the living entities become attracted to the external energy of the Lord, thus deviating from their constitutional position, they become bewildered and think themselves to be the doers and enjoyers. Arte hyavidyamanepi samsritir na nivartate dhyayato vishayan asya swapne narthagamo yatha. Just as one may experience being bitten by a snake in a dream and thus suffer, although there is no actual snake, the conditioned souls remain entangled in material existence due to absorption in sense gratification, although the objects of the senses are not real. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Sārārtha-darśinī. Although material bondage is false, the distress caused by material existence cannot easily be overcome. The Lord therefore explains here that although not factual, material life stubbornly continues for one addicted to sense gratification, just as a frightening dream continues for one who is sleeping. One who remains fully engrossed in thought of material enjoyment certainly becomes subjected to material miseries due to his contact with matter. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The experience of a dream has no value to the seer when he wakes up. In the same way, a liberated soul can understand that illusory material enjoyment and temporary material designation are not eternal. As a dreamer sees things that actually have no existence, the conditioned soul sees material objects as being separate from the Supreme Lord. All the transformable objects created by the external energy of the Lord are destroyed in due course of time. The spirit soul, being deprived of engagement in the devotional service of the Lord, who is the object of knowledge, as well as the opportunity to experience uninterrupted happiness, remains situated in an incompatible position while experiencing fragmented time, imperfect knowledge, and obstructed happiness. After one awakens from a dream, the remembrance of the dream may linger. Similarly, one engaging in the devotional service of the Lord may be sometimes troubled by the dim reflection of his previous sinful life. One should therefore become strong in Krishna consciousness by hearing the Lord's instructions to Sri Uddhava. Oh, there's still a few verses left, so I don't think I'll be able to finish because we only have 1 minute. Uh-oh. How many? Yeah, okay. Okay, so okay, let's just quickly read. Tasmad Uddhava Punksva Vishayan Asarindriyai Atma Grahana Nirbhatam Bhāṣya Vaikalpikam Brahman. Therefore, O Uddhava, do not indulge in sense gratification with your blunt material senses. Instead, understand how the illusion based on the dualities of material existence prevents one from realizing the self. Sārārtha-darśinī. Meditation on the objects of the senses with a spirit of enjoyment is the cause of all anarthas. Therefore, one should give up such meditation, realizing that it is only due to ignorance that one accepts the body as the self. Attachments to the material body, which is not the self, is the cause of illusion. This is the purport of this verse. The Supreme Lord instructs Uddhava that an intelligent person should realize the uselessness of trying to gratify the senses unnecessarily, seeing things as being without a relation to the Lord Krishna. Seeing things as being without a relation to Lord Krishna. If by seeing the pathetic condition of the conditioned souls, one becomes determined to realize his constitutional position, he should be considered a genuine philosopher. Alright, so we're gonna stop here, verse 58, but I'm gonna just quickly read the translation. We have 40 seconds, oh my god. A devotee who actually desires to attain perfection in this very life should tolerate all kinds of difficulties, even when insulted, ridiculed, or even beaten or confined by miscreants, or when spat upon or urinated upon by ignorant fools. With intelligence fixed in devotional service, he should remain undisturbed. Sri Uddhava said, "O most eloquent speaker, kindly explain these statements so that I may properly understand them." So we will hear, and then